Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Af Malhotra, the founder and host of Straight Talk. Once again, I have an absolutely storming episode for you. Two very cool individuals who are intellectually gifted. They teach, they educate the world on topics and issues that really matter to all of us, including the straight talkers on our show and our community. And of course, two people I discovered by reading some of their work, and they're both here today, and I'll introduce them in a second, because they both jointly wrote a couple of articles on MIT Sloan, which caught my attention, and it was so aligned to some of the good work we've been doing as a community. So it was necessary for us to go out to both these people, and they kindly accepted and have come on our not-for-profit show. So firstly, I would like to welcome Curtis Odom, who is an executive professor of management at the D. Moore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University in Boston. Hopefully I got that right. And Curtis is an ex-naval personnel as well, and that's a backstory that we'll definitely get into, because as you know, we have had a lot of naval officers and military officers on the show as well. He's also the managing partner of Prescient Strategists, a distinguished principal researcher at the conference board, and a member of the Forbes Coaches Council. So a very gifted individual with a lot of credibility. And of course, an author too, and we'll talk more about that. Our second guest is Charn P. McAllister, is also an academic and assistant professor of management at the W.A. Frank College of Business at the Northern Arizona University, and the co-author of a book that I definitely want to buy and read, and maybe get him to sign it as well, which is titled Political Skill at Work. Political Skill at Work. Many of you are probably thinking, oh my God, that's the reason I didn't get my job, or that's the reason I'm still in a job. How to influence, motivate, and win support. So I don't know if that's been published, right, Charn? Just to make sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's available all bookstores.
Awesome. So they both also wrote Why Pivoting People is a Strategic Priority back in June 2021, which is the article I first read. And then recently they wrote Equity in the Hybrid Office, that we all know about, which is the new normal, the new way of working. That was written in March 2022. So without further ado, firstly, Curtis, welcome to our show. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I did say to you, profanities allowed. You said, "Are you sure? Are you sure about this?" Because I'm an ex-naval man, and I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." So if you want to go for it, go wholeheartedly. But thank you for coming on our show, Curtis. Firstly,
thank you very much. My pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. And Charn, really cool to have you on the show as well. And I know you guys are synchronized. You're probably partners in crime or buddies, and you've written stuff together. You're probably aligned or not aligned, and then find alignment in ideas and thoughts. So we're going to kick off with the topic that I think is really close to my heart, and a lot of our listeners will resonate with this, which is as follows. I believe that there is a whole new hybrid working operating model, if you will, and you both talk about this. We'd like to understand the importance of the concept of equity and, of course, politics in this new operating model, where I am 50% at home, 50% in the office. And I'm concerned, in the old days, I used to get promoted because I was good at my job, of course, but I used to hang out with my boss's boss, and I felt like being around allowed me to be seen and to be part of opportunities that others wouldn't if they were working in virtual environments. And the whole damn thing's flipped now on its head. And I don't think people can figure this out, frankly. I talk to executives all the time. So my first question to you, Charn, I'm going to start with you, is firstly, tell us about tell us about this book you've written, because the title is brilliant. And then talk to us a little bit about what you believe are the biggest hurdles and challenges that face executives today in this new hybrid model. I know that's a big question, but we'll start with that, and then we'll keep going back and forth and have a really cool conversation.
Okay, yeah, thanks, F. The book Political Skill at Work focuses on a line of research that was developed in the early 2000s by Professor Jerry Ferris at Florida State University. And political skill is essentially your ability to navigate organizational politics, right? So those who are politically skilled feel very much like they are the masters of their environment. So you can think about this. If you are worried about political politics being done unto you, you're going to have more stress. You're going to be less confident in the workplace. The research has shown that those who have higher levels of political skill have more promotions, higher salary, again, less stress, all these host of wonderful things that happen in the workplace. And it's not just about, when we think about organizational politics, it always gets a really bad rap, like, oh, don't play politics. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a good thing, though, not a way to look at it, right? Because if you're a bystander and you completely take yourself out of politics, you have no say in your own destiny, right? Politics can be used for good things. If you're a savvy leader and there are awards or promotions coming up for your subordinates, you're going to play politics in a good way. You're not going to disadvantage anyone, but to make sure that your subordinates get those promotions, get those pay raises. So what we're kind of saying in this book is put your political skill to work, right? This is how you're going to motivate others, how you're going to get good things for your employees. And I'll be happy to, talk too long about organizational politics and political skill throughout the course of this, but to relate it to your question now, I think it is a flipped situation. I think you put it very eloquently, because it used to be that idea that the way you get promotion was, you go and play golf, you are hanging around the office. We even bring those examples up in the book.
Yeah.
But in the potentially new hybrid workplace that some individuals are living in now, it's different. And we kind of talked about this in the article with this new idea of visibility, right? Where you can't just be in the office the whole time. And so it's not about just staying visible and making yourself seen all the time, but using all those key moments to really show your ability to network with others, to show that you are incredibly competent at your job. So it's not just like, let me just hang on Zoom meetings for a little bit of extra time so people see I'm here. You're going to have to show your value in other ways, which in many ways is a good thing, right? Because we're focusing back towards competence and less towards some of that networking. We're never going to get away from the importance of networking and the importance of, being politically skilled at work. But these are some things that leaders need to take into account too, which is you have to find other ways to assess your subordinates, and probably more holistic and more genuine ways than we've done in the past.
Yeah, you're bang on. And I want to just raise one point, and I guess, Curtis, I'd like to bring you into this, which is that's fine, and that's us, the people. You call them subordinates, I call them staff or employees or team workers or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, you're at the mercy of the manager and or leader, depending on how you define these people. So, Curtis, tell us a little bit about. There's been so much change, and you can go through the change of the last 2.5 years, which is why we're having this conversation. There's been a seismic shift in operating patterns, behaviors, habits, and so on at every level possible because of the pandemic. But Curtis, tell us what responsibility does the leader really have? So one is you're my leader, and I'm this guy, and I'm 50% here, 50% there. Surely it's your responsibility to make me feel comfortable, to feel empowered, to feel like I've got equity, which is why you wrote this article. Unpack that for us for a moment. What does that mean?
Sure, and thank you for the question. I guess what I would say is I'd push back a little bit. I think that the leader's responsibility is to create the environment in which you as the person can feel empowered, that you feel like you could have, conversations, real talk conversations with your leader. The challenge that I think we're finding right now is that because of the past 2.5 years, the idea of leadership and leading have changed. And I think we have a lot of people who find themselves in leadership roles without the current leadership skills they need for the workforce. Our workforce is looking for empathy. They're looking for someone who is going to understand them as a person first, and then as someone who can go about getting the work done second. That's what the workforce wants. They want to come to a place where they can be themselves. They want to be the things that Charn and I have talked about, over and over through the years, is the idea of people want to be welcomed. They want to be valued. They want to be their authentic self, and they want to contribute and be rewarded for those contributions. That doesn't change whether we're in office, out of office, or in a hybrid environment. The challenge, Af, is that for leaders straight away, how do they need to change to meet the new expectations of the workforce?
Yeah.
The workforce is very vocal. They will say, listen, you know what? I'm not getting what I need from my leader. I'm not finding what I want. And as we know, top talent votes with their feet. They'll go somewhere else and leave a leader bewildered as to why am I losing people and what have you. Now, the challenge for organizations, as they're seeing this attrition, as they're seeing people leave, are they doing the data mining to figure out where are people leaving the organization from? Are they leaving it from a particular leader? Are they losing people from a particular part of the organization? Because that points to potentially that leader who needs some help of thinking about how to better connect and work with and get the most from the workforce. So to your question, I think as someone who is coming into an organization and has been forced to go into hybrid, they might be saying, you know what, now that I'm in this hybrid, I'm out of sight, I'm out of mind. No one even knows me. I'm a box on a screen in a Zoom or a Teams meeting. How do I need to make sure that I'm seen? Well, I think part of that is it's a shared responsibility. The age-old thing about managing up, it comes back in this way. If you have a leader that is not really aware, and I'll be kind, they're not aware of what they need to do as a leader, some of the onus is on the workforce or the employee to say, listen, I need to ask my leader. I need to share with my leader. I need to try to connect and say, listen, I wanted to have a conversation, I'm paraphrasing, but I'd like to have a conversation about how it would work better for me if we could work together, or what I would like to see from you. Can we have more frequent meetings? Can we have some connections? Or the new thing, can all of our meetings not be about work? Can we have one meeting that maybe is about work and another meeting is about the culture, how well I fit in with the culture, what I need to do differently, rather than waiting to the once a year, maybe, performance review conversation where I find out that for 12 months, I've run afoul of the culture. I've not done things to set myself up well in the organization. That's something that I think now leaders need to have that conversation more often. And it needs to be more transparency, because whether or not they know it, their employees want it.
Yeah. You're bang on. And you're making some really great points, which gets me to the first part of what I'd like to just get a bit deeper around for both of you, which is about demographics. And of course, you're both researchers and you're academics, so you study this in a lot of detail. Tell us a little bit about, if you've seen this, observed this. Is there a demographic, when I talk about leaders, is there a demographic difference? So let's say you've got a younger leader, age-wise, a millennial or even a Gen Z or whatever, versus someone who's a bit more of a baby boomer. Are you seeing ideals, values, adaptive behaviors different, irrelevant, relevant? Be good to know, because I think there are some inherent biases, and also there's some assumptions here. People say, oh, that guy's, it's just because he's in his late 50s, old school, he has no idea, he doesn't know what we want, versus, the opposite. So have you seen anything interesting, any patterns?
Yeah, I'll throw in, and then definitely want Charn to weigh in on this. Real time, last week I was having a conversation with an executive that I'm an executive coach as well. And I was talking with this gentleman, and he was saying, Curtis, I'm having a real tough time leading my team right now. And I said, okay, let's talk about that. And he says, they don't want to work. And I said, who is they? And he's like, the people that I lead. I said, okay, give me a little bit more information. And what he started to say is the fact of, he is someone who got to where he is by working the 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. He's someone who put it in on the weekend. He was the one that was available, if you can remember, he was always available by BlackBerry.
Yeah.
He was always the person who was available. He put in the time. He got to where he is. Very senior person at a C level. And he's saying, the people that I work with, that work with me, they don't want to work. So I had to avail him of something that's very important for him to think about, that I think cuts across all demographics. I believe right now there are three different types of people in the workforce, regardless of their demographic. There are people who are in the workforce because they just want a job, which means you're going to get the most out of me from 9 until 5, and then I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
There are people in the workforce who it's their career. They've gone from job to job of similarity. They've built a career born over 5, 10, however many years. And then there are fewer people in our workforce who are there for the purpose motive. Mm-hmm. They're in the workforce because what they do, it pulls them out of bed in the morning. It keeps them up at night, not because they're worried about it, but they're trying to, engineer how they can be better at what they do, how they can have more impact, how they can get more mileage, how they can actually find somehow the 25-hour day, which we know doesn't exist. Mm. But if you're a leader who is of the purpose motive, and you're trying to find people or lead people in the way to match where you are, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Mm. So I think part of what needs to happen across demographic is the leader needs to understand this person that's part of my team. Are they here for a job or a career, or it's their purpose? Based upon where that is, it almost goes back to the old situational leadership with Ken Blanchard and Hersey.
That's right. That's right.
It's almost related to that, but in now 3 instances instead of 4, what those guys did, and saying, okay, who am I talking to right now? Is this a jobs-oriented person? I need to meet them where they are. I don't need to pull them to where I am. That's a recipe for disaster. Let me meet them where they are. And if I do that, I have the opportunity to get the most out of that person and have them feel the most connected to the organization and potentially me as a leader. It's when I try to be inflexible with the way I lead that the drama ensues. So that's what I would say, and I'd love Charn to throw in as well.
Can I make one point before Charn comes in, if that's okay? So as you describe what you just did, I'm a visual guy. I think of a very basic pyramid, okay, or a triangle. And if I think about organizations today, right at the top of the triangle, which is the smallest cohort, is the purpose people, right? If as a CEO, you'd love everyone to be purpose-driven, but of course, that's not the case. And you need you need the diversity of motivations as well, let's be honest, because you can't have same for everything. It gets boring. Then you've got the middle group, which is what you call the career seekers. I love that group. So that's a good group. And then at the bottom, and again, I'm gross generalization, you've got the people who just got a job, right? And I think as a CEO or a C-level executive in a company, you would do everything you can in your power, culture, initiatives, diversity, inclusion, ESG, you name it, the whole lot, to flip that somehow, right? And move purpose right the way to the top. You'd wish, because then everyone would. At Straight Talk, we talk about purpose, passion, perseverance. So if you've got purpose, there's a high likelihood you have some passion for whatever your purpose is, and you'll graft hard, even when times are tough, right? And you'll give it a shot.
Right.
Wouldn't that be an enterprise? So I love that, and that's great. I've got one more question, but I'm going to wait for that question because it's to do with roles, responsibilities, tasks, and how to actually manage each person. But Charn, what would you say to that, and what's your lens there?
Yeah, as per usual, I'm going to agree with Curtis. He's a great mind when it comes to this stuff. I do want to say that, I teach leadership at Northern Arizona, and talking to my students who are, of course, 18 to 23 generally, what we're seeing as they look to go into the workplace, and I do a lot of like career type counseling with them because I only teach seniors essentially. Right. So they're just about to go. And I will say that even in the last 7 years of teaching, but definitely in the last 20 years, you see that there is more of a purpose-oriented focus of these students, right? That students want to find these purpose-driven jobs, and it's not that money isn't a factor, right? We know that money is. But I think organizations espouse values and purpose so much more now than in the past that it's an option to choose a purpose-driven life, which sounds like a cliche, but I spend 2 classes of my semester on how you can find that purpose, because that's going to be so much more important to you than getting that first job. If there's a difference in pay, you got to determine how much your happiness weighs in that, and there's a ton of research showing that, at a certain monetary level, anything above that is kind of diminishing returns, right? It kind of depends based on, cost of living where you are, but going above that doesn't add much happiness, right? So I try to express this to students: if you can meet that standard of living, purpose after that is what's going to give you that drive to keep on going. And I would say that, yes, there are definitely those 3 groups, and I feel like that's the next SMR. Every time I talk to Curtis, I'm like, oh, that's our next SMR. That's the next thing we're going to write. And I feel like we're going to write this this next week now. But
I'm ready to go. Let's make it happen.
I'm telling you. But I think I really do focus on the purpose side when I'm trying to train these students as leaders. But I do think that is a huge shift now, is that going into the workforce with the mindset of I'm going to find a purpose-driven job is absolutely an option, and something people are vying for with their first jobs, oftentimes sacrificing their salary or other benefits along the way to have that. And so there is a workforce coming up where we're going to find a lot of purpose-driven people. And I think organizations that don't recognize that, because to your point, Af, about switching the pyramid, I think it's actually trickling down. I think that top is like a sieve, it's just going down, and we're going to start seeing a lot more purpose-driven. employees. And if organizations do not recognize that, they're going to be left behind. And I think it's worth organizations finding a sense of purpose and something bigger than just themselves moving forward.
Is it fair to say there's another dynamic here which actually fuels this? We're using your model then, we're just calling it the pyramid for now, but fuels this pyramid, which is external factors like the startup economy, right? So in the old days, I'll just call it the old days, but in the past, let's say pre-pandemic, so not old, but pre-pandemic, you had you had choice, but of course the world was different, habits were different, hybrid wasn't the same way. Although loads of people were writing about hybrid working, it was more about bring your own device, and that's as far as it went. If you think about how outdated that was, like in 2.5 years, how we're now writing about a whole new paradigm, which is incredible. I mean, it's such a fantastic thing. The startup economy has built a whole new age of employers, right? And leaders who build cool companies, trendy companies, sexy companies that you want to be part of. Packages are good. Forget Google and those guys, but the smaller companies too. And they're all about purpose, right? Intentionally, unintentionally, true, false, don't know. But it's all about 1% of what we make goes to, everyone in our team. Come whenever you want, go when you want. It's not about beanbags, whatever it may be. That is it fair to say that's a huge threat to the enterprise? Because when you talked about, Curtis, you talked about, talent, top talent, folks with their feet and stuff. But is that one of the factors, not just about leadership being good or bad, it's the fact that you've got this threat, potentially, of another option, purpose, but purpose not with you and your big company. I'm going there, small company, but it's got loads of purpose and money and all the other factors. What do you think about that?
I think that what we have seen, yes, first and foremost, I think that does exist. I think what we've seen now, if you really go back to Thomas Friedman, when he wrote his book talking about the world, or the earth is flat, the world is flat.
Yeah.
It's really accelerated now because of the pandemic. Post-pandemic, we're at a place right now where we were home for a period of time where everybody took the time to really survey the landscape of what's available to them for career options. Before, people didn't do that. People got up, they spent their hour and a half in commute on their way to work. They went and did their thing. They worked. They hung around with the people at work, and they came home to their family and their loved ones, and they repeated cycle. There was so much busyness. There was so much time spent doing things pre-pandemic that now, in the middle of the pandemic, people were home. Cars weren't moving. People had nothing but the internet. They had nothing but their smart devices to amuse themselves. And what perpetuated this is the media. The media created this idea of the Great Resignation. They saw people moving, they gave it a name, they personified it, and next thing you know, people are running toward it. So what happened? In that space, people saw others saying, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go do something else. They saw people, who are working from home saying to themselves, if I'm working from home, why do I have to be here to do that? Why can't I go somewhere else? Why can't I do something else? And in that migratory state, of realizing I could do work from anywhere. And if I want to do work from anywhere, I want to love the work that I'm doing. Do I love the work that I'm doing here? Or would I potentially love that same work somewhere else? And the barrier to entry had been your geographic location to where that opportunity would be. If you were in San Francisco, you would look for opportunities that were in line for what you wanted to do, possibly in the San Francisco area. Don't have to do that now. I can live in San Francisco and work for a company in Chicago. I can live in Chicago and work for a company in Tampa. It doesn't matter. So what does that mean? People realize the fact they are less tied to location, less tied to an organization than ever before. And as they talk to others and they see others making their moves and finding some degree of happiness, or even just a reset and a refresh, they're taking the opportunity to do that. So the new purpose for some, as Charn was talking about, this new purpose of self. How do I purpose of self-preservation, purpose of my not being burnt out, purpose of not spending 3 hours round trip and commute every day, purpose of trying to say, you know what, I've been working hard, but now can I take the opportunity to work smart?
Yeah. I
want to add to that too, real quick. This idea too, and after you mentioned some medical issues in the past, I think this is a big part of COVID, right? We have a lot of young individuals who've experienced loss, or at least been close to people who've experienced loss earlier in their life on a grander scale than ever before. And I think it has made young individuals refocus what they want to do, or maybe it was their parents' own awakening, since COVID generally affected older individuals, and they pass it on to their kids, and so they actually have a little bit of maybe like a quick maturation process where they can start focusing on purpose over profit or salary right at the beginning. I also want to add to your second question too about, is this a threat to the larger organizations, these startups? And I will say that, what's really interesting is that I think it's easier for a startup to have a purpose and to have this cause or culture focused environment there. But as organizations grow, that becomes harder, because I think after you mentioned like, well, we're going to give 1% of our profits to this. And I think that's also what I'm talking about, the future. Those models of purpose are going to become outdated, in my opinion. It's going to require actual holistic cultural growth, right? Where it's not like, hey, every time you buy a pair of glasses, we're donating one pair of glasses. It's going to be, we want our culture really synthesized throughout our entire purpose and being. And I always tell my students, like, it's hard to find an organization that wants that type of culture and wants that type of focus, because there is an impact on the bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. Or as companies grow and turn into that corporate entity, they can lose themselves. And I think a good example for your listeners, ever want to see an example of this, is on Netflix. It's an old documentary called Print the Legend about 3D printing. And if you look at MakerBot, who had this really amazing open source community and commitment, and that was their culture, is we are going to make things together. When they eventually went corporate, they closed and went closed source, right? And that was a huge betrayal that actually led to the departure of one of the founders who had actually built the MakerBot. And I think that's what we're looking at going forward, is how can companies grow while retaining their purpose? Because there's going to be sacrifices to having a purpose, but that's part of, when we go to like the not new, but real stakeholder theory, which is it's not just about shareholders, it's about everyone, right? It's our community. It's and at this point, it's a global community. How do we really commit to not just making profit for me, my employees, and my shareholders, but the community as a whole? Yeah, it's a great point. And we talk a lot about this concept of conscious capitalism. It's come up, it's almost unintentionally come up in so many of our shows, like literally 40-50% of our shows. It always comes up, and you call it different things, right? One of the learnings, and I remember interviewing a CEO of a very large insurance company who sort of early retired on the show, early stages, and I remember him telling me, he said, listen, look, you got great questions, you got a great point. He said, there's one thing you have to understand. So I was like, go on. And he said, the thing you've got to understand is the people who are running the show, okay? There is a certain type of person running the show. I mean the show. Not the show you're talking about, which is the aspiration. I'm saying the people in positions of power. We know, right? And that individual or individuals come from a certain demographic sometimes, or not, have a certain club. There's a bit of elitism floating around and so on. And these people are actually making the decisions, right? And and he said, what has changed though, you're right, is like ST-like shows, straight talk shows. There's a groundswell of your kind, your people, your straight talkers who are asking tough questions, who are knocking on the door. It's like the virtual protests happening at the same time everywhere, like the pandemic. That shit hasn't happened before. That's for sure. You had a little bit of an awakening in some employees somewhere, and you sort of quickly quashed that. Or a company that was trying to be a bit extra clever, you acquired them. That was the general modus operandi. So then he says there's an opposing force that can disrupt what you're trying to do. Let's imagine we're trying to create a new world. Let's just be positive for a second, because that's why we're having this discussion. We're having this discussion so we can share knowledge and learn from each other and cement our ideas, validate them, and feel like, yeah, you know what? There is a new world. Charn said it, Curtis said it, XYZ said it, boom, I feel this is going to happen. He says the opposing force you've got to deal with, which is much greater, is the way we measure companies. And the way we have quarterly reports, the way you measure the sales leads, the CFO, et cetera, the way bonuses are paid, right? Unless you fix that, which drives human behavior, you're always going to have these opposing forces running. And it's like, yeah, I do want to do it because, come on, man, you know the score. I got to pay the bills. I got to make my $1 million a year, and so on and so forth. Tell me what you think about that, because surely that's come up in your research. I'd like your opinion, your views. I can add one thing, Curtis. Are you going, Curtis?
No, I'm laughing. I'm letting you go, but I'm ready. But you go.
So I kind of want to talk about the communities that you're talking about, just like the ST community, the Mavericks that you've cultivated. I think this is part of the great resignation, quote unquote. There are communities online, two that I followed for quite some time, just as a scholar of management, wanting to know more about the people I study. And this is the work reform movement and the anti-work movement on Reddit. I don't know. Are you familiar with either of those, Af?
Yes, I am on the Reddit movement. Yes, on Reddit. Yeah.
Okay. So I started following them because at one point I found them maybe 2 years ago, especially the anti-work group, and one of their posts made the front page of Reddit on one of the most popular posts, and I felt personally attacked as a management scholar. They said, "Look, we don't want shirts with our company logos. We don't want a snack bar. What we want is to be treated with respect and paid a living wage." And I was like, "Oh, I study like how to make good cultures, and snack bars and company logos all fit like the general dynamic." But I recently tried to publish an article on this at an academic journal. It didn't go as well as I had hoped. But I was telling them that we as management scholars have failed. We're so focused on these high-level cultural issues, snack bars, and how do we develop that team culture so people want to wear their logo. Like, we're not even getting some of the basic things right, like a living wage and making sure people feel respected by their bosses. And I ended up staying on that subreddit, and I followed them now for 2 years. And although they've had some growth issues, particularly anti-work, it's fascinating to watch the way these individuals are treated by bosses and leaders in their organizations. And I even hesitate to use the word leaders because I don't think they deserve that title. I mean, the type of abuses that people are experiencing on a daily basis is just unreal. But what is very interesting about this is it's coalescing people of all different demographics, of all different education levels, of all different work levels. And what we're seeing is this very powerful group, this organization of, like, someone says, "Hey, I'm having this issue at work," and then someone says, "Hey, here's the BLS standards, Bureau of Labor standards, right, for this rule." And people are giving others the power to fight back against these bad bosses or against unfair wage practices. And so I think this really is the first time people across all jobs, from top to bottom, are kind of banding together and say, "We're not going to take it, and we're going to help each other." And I think it is going to start holding leaders accountable. And there are now real forums. I mean, there are millions of people on these forums, and it's unbelievable what they're sharing and then how they're working together to overcome some of these, awful bosses.
It's very inspiring you saying that, because I remember the story with the guy from Amazon, the worker from Amazon, who's now forced one of the divisions to create a union, and of course that's going to catch on like wildfire. And I'm sure the Amazon leadership team's like, "Oh my God, what's happened here?" Because that goes against their entire sort of work plan. I want to say one more thing. I really commend you for saying that, by the way. Thank you for saying it, because I have been saying it for a while. As much as I love academia and I've spent my time in academia, I do think that whilst we're talking about all of this change and we're saying this is changing and that's changing and boo, I do think academia needs to change. I think academics need to change. I think diversity in thinking needs to come from academia as well. And I say that with the greatest of humility and respect and sincerity for great professors, many of whom you've talked about today, and authors. I do feel that a lot of what leaders end up practicing, not saying this is the sole responsibility of the academic establishment. A lot of leaders practice the management principles, the models, the tools, and everything else that comes out of best-selling books. And of course, the professor who goes and presents again and again. And the question really is, are the professors holding each other to account? And the only reason I say that is because I come from the research background. I won't name the company I come from, but you'll know if you do look at my background. And there is absolute groupthink. Absolute groupthink going on there. There's absolute prejudice, bias, preconceived ideas, racism, and everything you can imagine at least in the institutions I've experienced. It's not talked about, never spoken. And therefore, what you end up producing, the models you produce, the methodologies you release, the data sets that work or don't work, and I don't know why your article didn't get published, whether you were alluding to the fact that because it was real and they're like, "Holy shit, I'm not publishing that, dude."
That's what I'm going with, is why the only reason they could have rejected it, obviously.
Right. So Would you agree? And sorry, Curtis, you can come in here, but because I'm flipping it. But don't you think management scholars and leaders or business professors and so on have a responsibility to say, listen, guys, let's look at the research agenda for a second. Because I reckon you guys are so influential. You're shaping people's thinking to such a level. I'm not seeing. I've interviewed a lot of executives and professors from universities, but we handpick them, right? Yeah. And we handpick them because a lot of them are just like, oh my God, not this again. So I know it's controversial, but do you agree or disagree? I'm happy to take an alternative view as well.
Curtis, can I tee you up?
Yeah, I'm chopping at the bit. I got like 4 things I want to bring home. Yeah, go for it.
I'll go real quick, and then I'm going to tee you up. So I think, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think, the old adage of like the white tower, the ivory tower, right? Of like academia, right? In business, that shouldn't be a thing. We should be surrounding ourselves with professionals, and we should be surrounding ourselves with employees, leaders, and having those conversations, because that's where we get our best ideas to research and to teach. On my side, I bring in guest speakers, like several every semester, because I need people who are current leaders. The last time I was a leader outside of academia was 2012. That was 10 years ago, right? And I actively make opportunities for myself to practice actual leadership outside of academia, so I'm not stuck in whatever academia considers leadership, which is also a bastardized version of leadership, in my opinion. And so even in like the classroom, you got to think academia is almost stilted towards keeping the status quo with like textbooks. Textbooks get published every year. It's the same exact material over and over again. I gave up textbooks years ago, and I only assigned Harvard Business Review articles and MIT Sloan Management Review articles because it's current thinkers, right? And the students read it. I'll tell you, students do not read textbooks as a general rule, but my students read the HBRs, they read the MITs because they feel that these people have real credibility. Okay. And so what I want to say to tee up Curtis is that I am like a pure academic. I was military beforehand, and now I am academia all the way. And I don't have anywhere near as much business experience as Curtis. And I think that is why, well, one, Curtis is just a good guy, let's be real. But also what brought us together, I think, was I recognized that Curtis had all this experience, and I was drawn towards him because he's the kind of professor that colleges should be lusting after, right? There are a ton of business PhDs out there, right? And Curtis has a PhD too, or an ED. But what makes him different is he is teaching in a business school, and he has all the experience to rely on. And we need to have a mix of, some of the PhDs, but then we need the Curtises who have the education and all that experience. And he is like, I think, the lifeblood of a lot of these business colleges. Curtis, teed up, run with it.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me get my legs back under me, because that was some heavy praise right there, my friend. I really appreciate you, and thank you. As you know, I enjoy working with you, and it's because what you're seeing, Af, is two people who appreciate what our combined strengths yield in terms of how we look at it. So I want to pull some themes through, because there's just so much stuff going on. My mind is on fire over here. What Charn was saying, which is so fascinating, is that when he was describing the idea of the things with Reddit, if you think back for a moment, this unionized way of this thinking on Reddit is more the unionized way of thinking for today's modern workforce. It's almost like the new zeitgeist, if you think about it. Unions were in place to protect workers from bosses in the industrial age, the whole boss tweet idea, all of those different things. Move that forward into this knowledge age, and you have platforms like Reddit, which allow people to have a voice and allows people to crowdsource their outrage and then crowdsource their ability to do something with it. They can source other information for how to deal with things, rather than in the past, you had to go to HR. And as a reformed, and I should say once upon a time, HR executive, I know that HR's role, since this is called Straight Talk, HR's role is not to protect the people from the organization. It's to protect the organization from its people. I mean, let's be honest. If you go to HR, you are now flagged and watched as somebody that might be an issue for the organization. So that quiets people. Now, the thing that we all, hopefully can wrap our mind around is that the number one threat to an organization is a class action lawsuit, number one, unionization, number two, where it doesn't exist. So if you think about the gentleman who started the union at Amazon out on Staten Island, do you know how that came about? It came about because this guy went to the leaders about COVID safety shortfalls in the warehouse. They didn't listen to him. He staged a walkout. He got fired. And then a memo was leaked where the leaders said that this individual was unintelligent and not articulate. Pissed him off so bad that he staged the unionization. He doesn't even work for Amazon. He was fired. He was so dirty. He was so pissed off. He's like, you know what? Okay, I see how you want to play. I'm going to play a different game. That brings that forward. Now, to your last point about the academy owning this. Straight talk. I'm full-time faculty in a business school at Boston as a Black man. I am an anomaly. I'm an anomaly. And I also have the background that Charn alluded to. So that makes me not only an anomaly, it makes me someone that people have to try to figure out what to do with me.
Yeah.
Because of the standpoint, okay, this guy's got a lot of knowledge, skill, and ability. He's worked with he's been a Fortune 50 executive. He's worked with Fortune 100 clients as a consultant and an executive coach. This guy knows things, but I don't walk around talking about what I know. My superpower, as Charn and I talk about, I take content and put it into context. That's it. That's my superpower. I do that with my students. I try to help them understand what they're learning in the classroom. And like Charn, I don't use textbooks. I use HBR, SMR articles, and I use podcasts. One of the things I'm a hype for right now is if you look at some of the podcasts that are out there from Gartner, from McKinsey and others, real leaders coming into the classroom, it's the new guest speaker. It's the new guest speaker by having a podcast. You know, I did this in my class. There was a podcast that came out, and it was the former chief learning officer of Microsoft talking about how they took their company from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. Fascinating stuff, real time. But if you talk about the academy, to your point, we replicate the academy. We hire people whose research agenda matches ours. We hire people whose academic pedigree is like ours. If we're an Ivy League school, of course we only want Ivy League graduates to attend here. We do a lot of degree shaming. We do a lot of navel gazing at people's, where are their PhD from? Oh, you only have an EDD? Well, that's not the same. If your PhD's not from this, it's not the same. And Charn and I have some axes to grind. We won't do that here. But we have seen it.
Just a few.
We have seen things done to our colleagues. We've had things said to us. And the fact of, you know what? We don't fit into the academy's mold. So we're not quite as good, which is a bunch of bullshit. It's the idea of this. Let's talk to the students. Let's think about it this way. What's more important to the student, F? Going to a school where the faculty has these outstanding research agendas, or going to a school where the faculty get it and the faculty can take content and turn it into context and have the student walking out into the workforce or their co-op or their internship feeling like, you know, Professor McAllister's class taught me something I could use right now. It's not about a bunch of esoteric bullshit in the ether. It's something I now. That's the type of professor that we need to have. That's the type of professor students want to go to class and learn from. But instead, what did they meet? Who did they meet? The professor that the pandemic upended their ability to teach because they couldn't use overhead projectors anymore. That's what we're running into. That's an issue.
Yeah. And can I say, thank you for that, beautifully put. Can I say one more thing just to reinforce the point? This is a global issue with academia. It's a global issue with academia, whether you name the institutions there, but of course the same institutions on this side in the UK where I'm based. It's the same story because I've had the discussion. My question around solutionizing, though, just for a moment, I get it. The pain's horrible. You're passionate. We're all passionate about this because we care. And if you think of the academic institution as a corporate for a moment, and if you think about the fact that you're the consultants in the academic institution, you happen to be producing material and teaching. That's your game. That's your offering, and you're making money out of it. But actually, are they drinking their own Kool-Aid? Because that's the point, right? That you have the answers to a lot of the problems for the corporate. But of course, now institutions like universities and various other educational institutions are kind of semi-corporates themselves, going through their own political issue, the politics-related issues, race-related issues, etc., etc. So, if let's say this magic wand moment, right? Magic wand moment. You had a magic wand, Charn. You had one. I'll take one as well, but you both certainly have one. What would you do if for 10 minutes you could do anything you wanted with the future of academia? How would you flip it on its head?
All Charn, you got the first one.
Okay, so this is always controversial because it's a double-edged sword. I'd get rid of tenure, and most people hate to hear that. But what I've found is that I do think there's an importance with freedom of speech, and so I haven't really been able to suss out how we ensure freedom of speech and academic freedom, I should say, like amongst professors.
Yeah.
But what I see more often than not is tenure makes people lazy. And I've been at 3 different institutions, and I've seen senior faculty members in particular using handouts that they created 20 years ago, and they've been photocopied 16 times, and they're faded, and the material hasn't changed. And I understand that is, as someone who's going up for tenure next year, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if someone told me you had to be held accountable to your teaching evaluations for the rest of your time, right? I don't have a pass on those because I feel like to be a professor, like you said, you're teaching this new generation of leaders or scholars in whatever field, but particularly in business. You have a responsibility to not just your students, but I always tell my students on the first day, I say, here's my why. There's a Simon Sinek book, Start With Why, that I love. And my first 2 lectures are based on that. I said, we're going to find our why for this class. And so I tell them my why, which is, yes, part of my why is to make you better leaders, but you're really secondary. I care more about your future employees. I want your future employees to have a good life, and I want you to treat them well. And that's why I'm here. I said, that's what gets me up in the morning. And if I'm a professor who in 10 years is teaching the same class, I failed myself, I failed my students, and I failed those employees. And I do feel that sometimes tenure allows people to do just that, and they check out and they don't continue evolving with their students. And it's a type of protection that I know. I mean, I've worked with several professors, just to give one last example, who are degrading to students and who know that they are completely protected, and it just irks me to no end. And I felt like if their teaching evaluations and their research records actually mattered anymore, they wouldn't be here. And we'd be able to find some more productive people. And that's how it works in the real world. And I don't think there'd be anything wrong with that in academia. Most academics who listen to this will try to find my address and hunt me down, but I'm okay. Come at me.
I love it. I love it. Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
On that point. Does it exist right now where, so I'm a startup founder, right? I was a former corporate, also like yourself, in a FTSE or a Fortune 50 company. And I left the corporate and I started my own business, raised money, all that sort of good stuff. I've had investors, failed, succeeded, blah, 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 blah. Long story. I am where I am. I'm 43. And I see things, I have ultraviolet vision. I see things that I can't believe other people can't see, like you guys. And I'm doing this shit every day. I've fallen ill. I've had burnouts, and the list goes on. And I've had all the tough stuff, and I've had the good stuff, and I've enjoyed it all. And I've been fortunate to build this show over 2 years, which is just an accident, and organically turned into this huge show where great guests like you turn up. So I'm now at a bunch of universities, and I'm lecturing at those universities because I just thought, shit, I've got to share this with someone, right? Because where's it going to go unless I write a book and then no one's going to read the book anyway? Then I'm going to blog, and then some guy will read it, and there'll be a shorter blog, and so on. Is there a hope here, or is it happening right now where founders of startups, forget enterprises, I respect enterprises, but startups are super cool. Of course, I'm biased. Founders of startups are building the next enterprises, in technology and other areas. Can there not be some sort of a system? I don't mean just a guest speaker, because I've done guest speaking. I don't think it's powerful enough. I go for a guest speaking lecture. I'm doing 30, 40, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. A bunch of kids come around me, or students are like, do you mind, can I connect with you on LinkedIn? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I'm like, yeah, sure. But it all falls apart. There's no carry through. There's no follow through. The lecturer's like, great, man, this was great. Thanks, high five. Can you come again next elective? And I keep doing that. I'm doing it. But I'm not creating change. Not the way that I want to create change. There needs to be a program where I am affiliated with that university. I don't care if I get paid or not, because it's my philanthropy. And I have to be in workshops, and I have to be in lectures, and I have to deal with the questions that a lot of the students have in their minds, but are fearful of asking. Charn, you might be a great lecturer, but the other chap you described, the one that I don't want to talk about, he or she is not addressing any objections or concerns or fears. So, is there a program that you know of, or can there be a program where this is institutionalized? It's like with a university without that feed ain't a university.
Yeah, absolutely. There's entrepreneur in residence programs, right? So those are people
Oh,
who
yeah,
may
I'm
have
aware of
been
those.
entrepreneurs
Yeah,
or startups, and they can have full-time teaching positions at the university, right? Actually teaching classes and having the entire semester. We have at least one in the Frankie College of Business at Northern Arizona. As I understand it, they actually hired 6 or 7 about 10
excellent.
years ago.
Okay.
Um, I think the biggest problem is sometimes they get subsumed into academia, and it's like, hey, I came here to teach and talk about being a startup. I don't want to be on the committee for academic
Yes.
excellence, right? And we're sometimes squandering those resources. And I can't speak to other academic departments, but we can look at things like, oh, I can't. Is it Nicole Hannah Jones who the oh gosh it's the 1867 project. I feel so dumb now. She's the reporter who is now, I think, on. She was denied tenure at UNC.
Right.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Sorry to
yeah,
forget
yeah.
all this. Is it Nicole Hannah Jones? Is that, I
I
think, her
believe
name?
so.
But
I believe
so
so.
she's a real journalist brought into the faculty. You see creative writers, successful authors are sometimes brought in to be faculty in creative writing departments. But
Right.
in business schools, there are numerous people we could bring in to be these positions, right? But we have to treat them as such, as experts in that area, and keep them in that role, right, where they are the entrepreneur in residence or the expert in that content area. And what's so cool about business is it's great to, I mean, obviously I'm biased too. It's great to have PhDs because there are certain educational factors that we can bring
Sure.
in. There's a lot of
Sure.
science to it. But just as there's a science to management or a science to anything, there's also the art. And we need the people who've been there and done it. And I think the best is when those two mix, right? When we can bring both those. And so a student has science in one class, art in the next. What it does is it gives them that background of all the knowledge, but then shows them the applicability of it. And both classes basically support each other and make the student excited about learning.
Love it. That's part of the future Magic Wand, by the way. Curtis, what about you?
When you think about Magic Wand, I'm going to lean on the fact that you talked about the idea of education being its own corporation. For a long time now, for at least a 10-year period, I've been talking about this idea of the education business model and what that looks like. And I think that universities, all, not to single any out, are woefully inadequate about doing one important thing that businesses do that allows them to be successful. They lean on voice of the customer. Schools do not lean on the voice of the customer. The customer is the student.
Mm.
We, faculty, get around the room and we decide what courses we should teach based upon what's interesting to us. When's the last time we've had the opportunity to ask the students, hey, what would you like to be learning? What type of courses would be interesting to you? What kind of faculty should we be hiring? What kind of background? We don't do that. We are very, almost this patriarchal sense of you're going to get what we give you and you're going to love it. Why? Because we're XY University and we've been around for 200 and something friggin' years. Okay, great. But that's not taken into account. So my magic wand is to say that no course creation without voice of the customer. No just sitting around saying, I like this course, let's teach it. And then you're surprised when your enrollment is squat. It's because you're teaching something that only you're interested in. That's number one. But I want to go back to something else you mentioned, is the idea of being the guest speaker that comes in. And I'm going to be, people are already looking for Charn. I'm going to have people come looking for me now. So what I'm going to say is this. That professor of the class that you spoke in as a guest, that professor is not supporting what you talked about. That professor is not caring about that. You came in to raise their student evaluation score because they got their star power. They wanted a lecture off. They leaned into saying, you know what, I'm going to have this guy come in or this person come in. And they're going to talk and I'll be cool with the students and I'll get a rise out of them. And they'll be like, wow, this is great. But at the end of the day, what is that professor doing after you leave that ties the next lecture, the next discussion, the next whatever, back to what you brought into the classroom? Instead, they move on. It's like scene change, move on. So we talk about the idea of tenure and what Charn was saying. I completely support it. If you think of the academy, they're adjunct faculty, part-timers. There's where I find myself as non-tenure track, and there's the tenure track faculty. I love being a non-tenure track faculty member for one reason. I believe in meritocracy. If I'm not doing my job, kick me the hell out. But if I'm bringing it, then you need to rally around me and give me more support. And I think that that's the thing that's missing in universities. My problem is this: when did research become more important than teaching in the university. They should be equal. One should not be more important than the other. I'm not saying that teaching should be more important than research. They should be equal. And I think that that's part of it. If you're going to be a research university, that's one thing. If you're going to be a teaching university, that's something else. But if you are a teaching college and a research college, but if you're truly going to be a university, in my opinion, you should be able to, Charn's point, have the art and the science. You need to have people who can teach and people who can do research, that their research informs their teaching and their teaching informs their research. They're inextricably linked. I'm not a researcher by trade. I'm a practitioner. What I do informs my research agenda. It's not the other way around.
Correct.
And that's what allows me to have the fun that I do have. And I love the fact that, listen, every year I'm being looked at whether or not I did enough to stay here for the next year. I'm fine with that. Because that's what the real world is supposed to work, in my opinion. But now I know people are coming to look for me. So
lock your door, Curtis. Lock your door.
I have to say, I think we can talk for hours, seriously, because I have so many more questions. This format, of course, is for about an hour or so. I definitely think we're going to be doing some stuff together, and I'd love to pull you both in to another show at some point in the future when you write a few more articles. We're coming to the end. I mean, I'm so honored to have you both on the show. I think I've certainly had an enriching conversation, and it's inspired me to think about a few things very differently. The next time I go to the university, it's a well-established university here where I'm a guest lecturer. In fact, next week, Monday, and the chap who runs that, lovely guy who's brought me in, I do want to bring up these issues. I probably won't even discuss it openly. I will refer to this episode. I will, because until you do this, you can't get to the crux of the real issues. And of course, students want to hear this. They want to hear that there's change going on, and there are people who get it. There are people who get it. And not everyone is like whoever that person was you described. That person's going to go, whoever that person is going to go down in the history books as, the not to do practices. So listen, I'm so grateful. Curtis, thank you so much for your time. Beautifully articulated, great energy. I really respect your wisdom, but also respect, the graft that you've put in. And I get it. You made some important points about you being an outlier, and I can understand that. And that must be so friggin' difficult and challenging. But yet you differentiate yourself, and I certainly heard you, and so will our community. So long may that continue. And don't give up your practitioner hat, because that's the one that is so, so crucial to better education in the future. So my thanks to you. And Charn, to you, my friend, thank you so much for the unique perspectives, especially those sort of big shifts and changes you want to make if you had the magic wand. And I think you called out the management professionals, or should I say the scholars or the academics as well. And that's the first time the scholars have called it out themselves. And I really respect that too. So long may your collaboration continue. I'd love to be in touch, love to be part of it. I'd love to speak at your universities as well, if at all, if it's of value, and keep connected at many levels. I have so many more questions and ideas for you. So thank you so much. Before you go, I'd just be grateful if you could give me some feedback on how this experience has been for you. And we've gone on longer, but I think it just continued organically, so I let it go. But Curtis, maybe you can start and just give me some feedback. I'd appreciate it. And then, of course, Charn, yourself.
Yeah, I thank you, Af, for the opportunity to be here. I think the only feedback that I have, and it's confirming feedback, is that this is a natural conversation. This was definitely not a staged conversation. This is just three gents talking about things that obviously they're passionate about, that are interconnecting, and I think it's fantastic. I'd love to have the opportunity to work with you, have you speak in my class at any time, and just to have a little bit of fun. If you can't find either myself or Charn in the future, it's because those people that are looking for us, it's because they found us. But other than that, I would love it. I had a great time today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say, thank you as well. And of course, anytime you'd like to be a guest speaker, I would love to have you. And you'll probably get an email from me to set up a time for fall, and not just because I want you to raise my teaching evaluations, as what Curtis said. One of the things I love is, when I've had guest speakers in, I probably take as many notes as the students, and I try to incorporate that back into my classes, because again, like that's that's how you learn, right? You have to talk to people who are in it right now, because
Yeah.
when, last time I was leading 2012, that was 10 years ago, right? And so my skills have definitely deteriorated, and the generation has swapped out a bit. I'll say the one thing that I love most about this is, like Curtis said, it's honest, but also it's bi-directional in terms of how great it is. I mean, we got possibly a new idea for our next SMR, and I'll be honest, Curtis and I have been texting for the last 3 to 4 weeks about what is our next topic and throwing it back and forth. And I love that the conversation is so open, so honest, that new ideas can form, and we can, I think all three of us were able to kind of combine together. And I thought of new things, new ways to think of things. Just I have several pages of notes here that I was keeping of just listening to you, listening to Curtis. See, we're always taking notes, and I think maybe that's what drew Curtis and I together too, is that we're always trying to learn. I think this podcast is a great opportunity. Obviously, I hope for your viewers, but also for your guests. I mean, I really appreciated just getting your insights on several of these areas, Af, and I wrote down those questions you were hoping we would answer, because I think those are awesome insights, and that's what makes these articles valuable, is they answer questions that people want to have answers to. So thank you for that. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, and for your humility as well, both of you. We'll definitely be in touch. I'm UK based, but that's not going to hold us back. Location doesn't anymore. And we'll collaborate and we'll chat, and we will bring you back on the show if you're up for it down the line, when we're going to have a slightly different discussion. Thanks so much. Look after yourselves. I'm going to turn off the record.